Hello everyone and welcome to Byjus Exam Prep IAS. Today in this session we are going to have a discussion on the newspaper of 3rd of April 2024. So let's begin with the list of articles that we are discussing today. First, these are the two articles that we are going to discuss in detail. First is poll campaigns in India must reflect climate issues. Now we'll discuss about what the role of climate change is on Indian elections, and then the second one, Russia working to remove Taliban from terrorist list. Now we'll try to analyze this also in detail and the interplay of terrorism with the relations between Russia and Taliban. Then from prelims perspective, there are these three articles that we are going to discuss. One on heat waves, second based on some report that has been published by the World Bank, and then one article based on Kahneman's contribution to understanding of psychology and economics. And then after that, from the perspective of revisited headlines, there are three articles that we are going to discuss today. First is about ED, what Supreme Court has said. Secondly, about the Patanjali case. And third, about the new problems that we are seeing between Iran and Israel. So these are the articles to be discussed in today's news analysis. Now let's begin with the very first article that we have on your editorial page. Just give me 1 second, sorry. Yeah. So the first thing that we have is on your editorial page, and that is poll campaigns in India must reflect climate issues. Now what exactly are we talking about here? Now this particular article, it takes its reference from the State of Global Climate report that was published recently in the month of March, and this is something that has been published by World Meteorological Organization. Now there are certain highlights that we see in this report, certain key points that has been raised by this particular report. Now when you look at all these points, the very first point that it says is, and something that you have been reading about, that 2023 has been the warmest year on record, and that's why they say that the temperature of 2023 has been 1.45 degrees plus or minus 0.12 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial average. All right, above the pre-industrial average. And this is something that we have been talking about for a very long time, at least since the Paris Climate Summit, that what the importance of not exceeding 1.5 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial average is. And there are a lot of reports. I'm very sure that you've heard about all of that. You've studied that in climate change and understanding of the environmental issues. Yet this needs to be brought into account every time something like this happens, because what happens is, because these kind of reports, they are being discussed so many times with you that you start neglecting some of the finer details of these reports. So it's very, very important for you also to realize the importance of these reports and also understand the data. Also numbers, some of these numbers that have been published, they become very, very crucial. So that's why don't forget these numbers, don't overlook these numbers, because I know these are the numbers that are being brought in front of you a lot of times. Maybe every third, fourth day you are coming across these numbers, yet the importance of these numbers remain. So that's the first thing that it has said. The second thing that it has said is that the concentration of the three most important greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, methane and nitrous oxide, they have reached record high observed levels. So that's why this is again something which is very problematic, that three of the most problematic greenhouse gases that we know of, carbon dioxide, and then we have methane, and then we have nitrous oxide. Now in this particular scenario, what we understand is that all these, they become very, very crucial for us to understand that not only nitrous oxide but other nitrogen oxides also, they are not good for the environment, but nitrous oxide especially is something that becomes crucial for us to understand the value of. And what we see is that of all these three, they have reached record high levels. They have reached record high levels as observed in the report. Then at the same time, the report also talks about ocean heat content, and it says that it has reached the highest level in the last 55 years of observational record that we have. So that's another. So you just look at all these numbers and all these data, that when it comes to the ocean heat content, it has also reached the highest observable levels. All right, this is the highest in 65 years, highest in 65 years of observational data. Then at the same time, it also talks about the fact that when it comes to the global mean sea level, that also has reached a record high. The rate of sea level rise also in the past 10 years has been more than doubled. All right, it has more than doubled since the first decade of the satellite records that we had started taking, that was back in 1993 to 2002. So that's why what we are saying here is that 2014 to 2023, when we are looking at this particular data as well, we see that the global mean sea level also has reached a record high. Global mean sea level has also reached a record high. This is again something that has been mentioned in the report. Then after that, the report also says that the Antarctic sea ice, what we see is that the Antarctic sea ice extent has reached an absolute record low in the month of February, and that's why the annual maximum extent, that was something somewhere around 1 million kilometers square below the previous records that have been observed until now. So this is again the maximum low that has been ever observed for Antarctic sea ice as well. So Antarctic sea ice, this is something that has reached almost 1 million square kilometers, 1 million square kilometers below the previous record maximum low, below the previous record maximum low. So just imagine where we are heading. And some of the data that we get from the global set of reference glaciers, for that also what we see is that they have also been experiencing the largest loss of sea on record since 1950. So that's why when you look at all the data that we have for glaciers between 1950 to 2023, there also we see a very grim picture, where we see that when it comes to the glaciers, they also have experienced the largest loss of ice. So glaciers also have shown the largest loss of ice since 1950. So that's why, and all these are being driven by the extreme negative mass balance that has happened in a lot of areas, especially when it comes to North America and Europe. And glaciers all across the world, they have been drastically reducing, whether it comes to the Himalayan glaciers or even the European glaciers. We have seen that all these have been problems, and the extreme weather conditions, they continue to lead a very severe socio-economic problem as well. And that's why we see that there have been extreme heat effects that has been seen world across. We are seeing that in India. In another article, we'll discuss that as well. And at the same time, we are seeing the same in other parts of the world also. So that's why these are the things that have been reported according to this particular report. It also talks about the global food security. That food security, the population displacement, and the impacts of the vulnerable population that we see, all these are mounting as a concern by the time we are reaching, when we are looking at 2023-24 scenario. And the weather and the climate hazards, they also have been making the scenario way worse for the entire world. So that's why we see that there are so many things, there are so much of problems that are being caused due to climate change, and the effects are now visible. Until you can say 5 years back, we used to talk about the fact that these are things that are going to be a big challenge, and for the next decade or maybe 50 years from now and 20 years from now, this will happen and that will happen. But all these have become realities of the day, and realities where we still have closed our eyes and we are not really concerned about a lot of these issues. But the data is in front of you, the problems are in front of you, and you all know and you all have seen and you all remember what the things are and how the things have changed in the last 20-30 odd years, and slowly and steadily the things are going from bad to worse. So that's why we need to understand all these problems, and that's why in this context this article talks about the fact that some of these things which have been shown and talked about in the report. Now, in this report, basically one thing that this article tries to bring forward is how elections can play a very, very important role in the midst of election season that we have here in India, and a lot of elections happening all across the world as well. This is where the report is saying that this is something that could influence the political parties also to prioritize climate change in their agendas, and they should also try to promote awareness and outline the clear steps to combat global warming. And this is something that this approach is not something that only serves as a public interest but also aligns with the broader goals that have been established. For example, India's position that we have taken against climate change, and how we are trying to establish ourselves as one of the leading powers of the global south. So in that sense, we need to understand the importance of a comprehensive climate action plan also in trying to achieve all the economic prosperity and the well-being for the people of this country. But all things aside, let me ask you this question. Do you think environmental issues really matter in the Indian elections? Year after year, if not national elections, state elections do happen. Election manifestos are released by every political party before the elections, whether at the state level or at the country level. So, but do you think that election manifestos, or let's say the political parties in general, they really care about climate related issues or environmental issues? The problem also stems from the fact that, does it matter for the voter? The voters like you and me, does it matter for us? Are we going to vote based on these kind of issues? Probably not. And maybe many of you already have thought, or you already have decided that you are, depending on whether you like a closet full of designer kurtas or a closet full of white t-shirts, you have already decided whether you are going to vote for this party or that party, based on what you feel, based on what you think, based on what ideology you support. It's not really based on what kind of issues are these political parties picking. And that's why they don't need to pick these issues, because we are not voting on these issues. Unfortunate state of the country is this, and probably we all, I mean, I'm not going to point out one person or another, but we all have been acting as educated illiterates, where we know what the things are, we understand what the issues are, we know where we should be pressurizing a particular political party or whoever we want to vote for. But unfortunately, we are not in that state, and that is where the problem lies. You go back and look at the 2019 or 2014 or 2009 or 2004 election manifestos, and look at how many environmental problems have been spoken of. And if they have been spoken of, if they have been mentioned in the election manifestos, have they been followed? Was there anything done to ensure that whatever has been written in these manifestos are being done, or has somebody been held accountable for? And forget about a normal general public, a general voter, but look at the media as well. That are the media also, whether this side media or that side of media, whether they are picking up these kind of issues. They're not. So everybody has already announced and understood what their agendas are going to be and what they are going to be asking the votes on. But unfortunately, the bigger issues do not matter in these kind of conditions. We know that extreme weather conditions are rising in India. We know that farmers are going to be affected because of climate change. We know that the fishermen are going to be affected by climate change. We know that there will be a lot more deaths that will happen because of climate change. We know that India's GDP will fall because of climate change. We know that there are going to be a lot of health issues because of climate change. Doesn't matter. So that is where the problem lies, that the voter has to also come forward, and the voter also has to start taking their stance on these kind of issues. Otherwise it is not going to matter. And although election manifestos have not been released yet by the political parties, but just go on and read it once it is released, and tell me what kind of election problem or what kind of environmental problems they have spoken of, and what are their promises with regard to the environment and climate change. What are their agendas and what are their plans for the next 5 years if they are brought to power. So these are the things that we also have to look into. Some of the things, for example, internationally, we know that India made promises in the Paris Climate Summit and also followed up. And we have been doing a lot in the last 10 years in ensuring that climate change or the renewable energy sector grows in India. And we have done fairly well there. But the problem is way greater than only one sector which is prospering now. We have to look into all these other aspects as well, and probably it has to be led by the public of the country, and that is what will secure a good future for us in these kind of regards. Now coming to the second article, Russia working to remove Taliban from terrorist list. Now what exactly do we see here? Russia basically has announced its intention to engage discussions with Afghanistan Taliban and the leadership that we have there as a part of Taliban, and they want on very significant matters, and they have signaled that there will be a move towards removing Taliban from its list of banned terrorist organizations. Now in this particular scenario, it was not really specified what kind of issues are to be addressed, but it was mentioned that there is a need to resolve the pressing matters through communication with the Taliban. And in this announcement, this basically, we know that this has happened after the horrific attack that happened in Moscow, outside Moscow last week, and this is something that was attributed to the Islamic State militants. Now in this particular regard, the US intelligence says, what the US intelligence has said is that this attack was carried by Islamic State's Afghanistan branch, and that is what has been reported. So overall, this is basically what we see, that they want to remove Taliban from the list of its banned organizations. And overall, what we see is that this is where investigations that were done by the US intelligence, they say that it was Islamic State's Afghanistan branch that had done this. Now although Russia also has a parallel stance, that at one hand they are looking towards the Islamic State and what the role of Islamic State is in all this, but at the same time they also have spoken of that whether there is an Ukrainian list, a Ukrainian involvement in this particular scenario or not. Although this has been denied by Ukraine, it has been denied by these kind of claims have been completely washed off by US and other intelligence agencies as well. But we know how Russia works, and in this scenario they are also looking towards a Ukraine-based involvement, if at all there is one. Although Ukraine has completely said that these kind of incidents they would never support and they are not at all involved. And Islamic State already has taken, one branch of Islamic State already has taken the responsibility for the attack. Now in this regard, when it comes to this entire understanding of the scenario, there was an attack that had also happened back in 2021, which happened in Kabul. And in this attack, what we saw was that this was again a very horrific attack where almost 170 people in Afghanistan lost their lives, and at the same time there were 13 US nationals also who lost their lives. Now in this regard, we need to understand what the interplay of Taliban and Islamic State and Russia in this particular regard is, because Russia is saying that they are ready to engage with Taliban in this particular scenario. What we see is that despite the attack, the relationship between Russia and Taliban is unlikely to fundamentally change. And the Taliban, which has been combating this particular branch, because it has not been only one problem for Taliban's approach here. We see that there are multifaceted problems that even Taliban has been facing. That Taliban had promised that they would prevent international attacks from Afghan soil. Now this is a claim which is now under scrutiny, because on one hand Russia has adjusted to Taliban's rule, and that's why, due to lack of viable you can say alternatives in Afghanistan, but this is where we believe that Russia might go forward and ask Taliban for further actions. Now overall we have to understand that when it comes to the particular branch in Afghanistan, what we see is we are talking about a particular branch, that is ISKP. Now this ISKP was the one that was also involved in the horrific attack that happened in Afghanistan back in 2021, and the same ISKP is also involved in this attack that happened in Moscow. Now in this particular regard, what we see is that this group basically has stepped at its international attacks. It has done attacks in Uzbekistan, in Tajikistan, in Iran, and now we see that they have also done an attack in Russia. And at the same time they have done many attacks in Afghanistan and even including Pakistan. Now in this particular regard, when we look at what we see here is that it demonstrates the resilience that they have to undermine Taliban's international relations, and that is something that is trying, and they are in a manner also trying to isolate Taliban from the international arena and trying to destabilize the rule of Taliban. So overall we have seen the dynamics changing and these kind of dynamics developing here. ISKP, they have emerged as a direct opposition to Taliban, and many of the people who are there in this particular branch, they have been filled by the former Taliban commanders and militants who were first in Taliban, and now they have joined the ranks in ISKP. Now despite Taliban's consistent effort against the ISKP, which you can say significantly also includes the military operations that they have carried out and the killing of many key ISKP leaders, we see that ISKP remains a very persistent threat for them. And at the same time, Russia, alongside Iran, China and the Western countries, they have remained very deeply concerned about the threat of terrorism that has been coming from Afghanistan, that is originating from Afghanistan. And with all these actors who have been engaged in dialogues with Taliban as well, we see that they have been trying to prevent any kind of spillover and trying to mitigate the risk of any kind of civil war that can happen here, because that can also influence over beyond the Afghanistan borders and all these kind of areas which are nearby also. So that's why we have seen that there have been a lot of dialogues that has happened between Russia, China, Iran, etc. with Taliban to ensure that all these things can be prevented. So that is where we are right now. And at the same time, we have seen that countries like Russia and China specifically have shown a willingness to engage with the Taliban. And they have tried to overlook certain international norms to ensure that they can secure their own interests. Even Iran, despite all the sectarian differences that it has with Taliban, it has also tried to to maintain a pragmatic relationship with Taliban, because it also understands that the bigger challenge for them will be organizations like ISKP than Taliban itself. So that's why we see that there is a very complex interplay that we see in all these relationships that are being maintained here. Now overall what we have seen is that although Russia has sought to prevent ISKP from strengthening and to maintain stability in Central Asia, its capacity to compel Taliban into specific action or significantly is very constrained. And it's not that they would be able to do a lot in this scenario, and that is probably where the dialogues are beginning. That right now we are looking towards a situation where Russia will start engaging with Taliban and maybe provide them with any kind of support that the Taliban probably will need to counter all these kind of organizations that have started building up. We have been discussing about the TTP as well, which also has its presence in Afghanistan. At the same time, now we are also discussing about the ISKP, which also has its presence in Afghanistan. And at the same time, there are other outfits and other organizations that have also started spilling over, and they are causing a lot of issues for Taliban itself. So that's why for the Taliban also it becomes very difficult for them to manage everything in Afghanistan, and the promises that they have made, because internationally they have made promises that they will not let any terror activities happen internationally which are originating from Afghan soil. But all that, although they said all that, but unfortunately they are not able to control a lot of these activities. So that is where we now see that there is a lot of international engagement where all these parties, whether it is Russia or Iran, so whether it is about Russia or whether it is about Iran, whether it is about China, we see that all these countries, they have been coming together. Pakistan gets affected a lot because of all these activities on the Afghanistan soil, and we see that indirectly there will be repercussions for India as well when it comes to all these issues. So that's why there are all this interplay which we need to understand, and how the things are shaping up, because no two players here have a straightforward relationship. They all have some problems with each other, but at the same time they also are finding certain common causes where they have to come together also and ensure that they are cooperating with each other. So we have to see how these kind of events they fold up in the coming months. Now coming to the prelims based articles, the first one is, will India experience more heat wave days this summer? Now why exactly are we talking about this? Because we have seen, and you might have seen the recent reports that have come, that for example on Monday the Indian Meteorological Department announced above average heat wave days for India, impacting southern, central, eastern and northwestern regions. Now this is something that there are a lot of issues that we know of, and this is where these issues have been reported. So above average heat wave days are expected across India, and overall when it comes to this, that's why this forecast has been just made yesterday, day before yesterday, and we see that this is something which is going to create even bigger problems for us with all the existing challenges that we have, even to meet country's power demand. When you look at the hydroelectricity output, it has been experiencing a very significant decline, and India has faced increasing reliance on coal altogether again, because and this is something which conflicts with its Paris climate agreement commitments as well. So what happens is that in this particular scenario, because of the heat, because of the lack of rains, we see that the hydroelectricity is on a decline. The output from hydroelectricity is on a decline, and if hydroelectricity is unable to provide that required power, what will provide? Coal will provide, right? Coal will provide, and if coal provides, it's a problem. We want, and we have been talking about how we want to decrease our dependence on coal, that we were somewhere around 70 to 75% of electricity was being produced by coal in India, and we had brought it down to almost 55 to 60% of electricity coming from coal. But we see that in the past few months again there has been a rise here in this data, because now we see that coal again is actually providing larger amount of power as compared to what it was providing 6 months, 8 months back. And that's why we are saying that this is something that also contradicts our commitment under the Paris Agreement. So that's why there are all these issues, and the forecast that has been done by the Meteorological Department, it also forecasts or it also indicates that most of India will see a higher than normal temperature, both the maximum as well as the minimum temperature, and this also is attributed largely to El Nino conditions, because El Nino conditions that have elevated the sea surface temperatures, and that's why they disturb the global climate patterns. And in case of January 2024, it has been recorded as the warmest in 175 years, and that's why it also highlights the problem that we are facing or we are going to face perhaps in the coming months. Now, although it is expected that El Nino is going to weaken in the coming months and La Nina conditions potentially it is going to shift to La Nina conditions where it might decrease the effects of El Nino, but those are the things which are still to be seen because there are certain models which have proposed something like this. Now overall we have to understand certain things. That first thing, when we talk about heat wave, what do we mean by a heat wave? Right, this article talks about the heat wave. So heat wave in general, you can say that this becomes a period of excessively hot weather. All right, excessively hot weather, and this is something that may also be accompanied by high humidity. So we are talking about excessively hot weather. Now how do we define the excessively hot weather? Plus also higher humidity. Although humidity is not a very important factor here, but heat wave largely is attributed to excessively hot weather. Now when it comes to the definition of heat wave, this is where the daily maximum temperature goes, daily maximum temperature of more than 5 consecutive days. Alright, 5 consecutive days will be above average by 5 degrees Celsius. That is, the maximum temperature will be 5 degrees Celsius above the normal expected maximum temperature for at least 5 consecutive days. Alright, so that is how the World Meteorological Organization defines heat wave. Although we see that there are variations in this definition as well, but largely when we say what World Meteorological Organization says is that if for 5 consecutive days, the maximum temperature is 5 degrees Celsius above, alright, 5 degrees Celsius above the normal or expected average maximum temperature, above average maximum temperature, then in that case it will be declared as a heat wave. Now in this particular scenario, although because of local climate variations there are differences in the definitions as well. So for example, let's say when it comes to India, the Indian Meteorological Department, it has specified heat wave based on some particular criteria. First, that a heat wave is declared if the maximum temperature of a weather station reaches at least 40 degrees Celsius in the plains and at least 30 degrees Celsius in the hilly regions. And this is where they would say that the normal departure from the maximum or the normal maximum temperature goes to beyond at least 4.5 degrees Celsius. So in this case, when what they say is that if, let's say, the maximum temperature, alright, the maximum temperature in a plains, alright, in the plains region, the maximum, according to the Indian Meteorological Department, the maximum temperature in the plains, if it goes beyond 40 degrees Celsius, and in the hilly regions if it goes beyond 30 degrees Celsius, this is where they will start issuing the warning for the heat wave. So that's why heat wave, that's why it can also be declared if the actual maximum temperature is surpassing beyond 45 degrees Celsius as well, and the severe heat wave will be declared if the temperature is going to cross 47 degrees Celsius. And when it comes to this heat wave, that's why these are the things that will be taken into account, and if these temperatures are are touching, and if they are going beyond these temperatures, then in that case they'll say that it's a heat wave. Now overall, when it comes to heat wave, we know that it can cause severe heat stress, it can cause exhaustions, and there are a lot of health related problems that it can lead to, and we do see that people also die because of heat waves, because of severe heat waves that many a times in India we counter during these months. Now these are, when it comes to these things, they are very significant weather related distresses, and overall when it comes to it, we see that they affect large areas and they can have very profound impacts on agriculture, on energy, on water supply, on human health. So we know that it can have a lot of impact. Now when it comes to El Nino, now this time we are also mentioning that El Nino also has an impact. What happens when El Nino happens in India? What is the impact of El Nino in India? El Nino is typically associated with a weaker monsoon, all right, and that's why and how it does it come? It comes from the warming of the Pacific Oceans, all right. This is basically what happens, as you see in the picture, that a normal year is this, where we see that the equatorial winds will gather the warm water pool towards the west, correct? Now in this particular scenario, in an El Nino year, eastern winds weaken and the warm water, it starts to move eastward. Now in this regard, what happens is that overall what we see is that there will be warming of the Pacific Ocean, all right. So Pacific Ocean warms. In case of El Nino, the Pacific Ocean will be warmer, and the warming of the Pacific Ocean, it affects the monsoon winds, and that's why it can lead to decreased rainfall during the crucial monsoon season. So that's why this is something that will affect the monsoon winds, affects monsoon winds, and this leads to weaker monsoons in the monsoon season, all right. So that's why this is something that happens, and this leads to decreased rainfall during the crucial season in the monsoon area, I mean in the monsoon season. Now in this particular regard, what we also see is that this reduced rainfall during the El Nino years, it can also lead to very hot conditions and increased likelihood of droughts as well. And it can also increase the heat wave conditions, and that's why it will make the entire scenario more severe and more prolonged, especially in the pre-monsoon and the monsoon periods. And this is exactly where we are right now. So that's why we see that it causes a lot of problems. So it causes weaker monsoons, and at the same time it also causes heat waves. It also leads to heat waves in the pre-monsoon and the monsoon seasons in India. And at the same time, what we see is that because of the decrease in the monsoon rains, it can also stress the water resources, and that's why it also starts affecting agriculture, and it also starts to lead to water shortages in various parts of the country. And that's why we see that there are so many problems that it can lead to. So overall, that's why we have to understand that all these things that are building up now, El Nino also plays a big role in all this. Now coming to another article, India risking demographic dividend. Now in this particular scenario, we are talking about a particular report that was published by the World Bank, and the name is Jobs for Resilience. All right, the Jobs for Resilience is the name of the report that has been published by the World Bank. Remember these names because you might have seen, if you go to the previous year questions, you'll see that these kind of questions are asked a lot of times, that recently Jobs for Resilience report was published. Which of the following organizations published the report? And they will give you the options. So that's why these kind of reports, what report has been published by which organization, remains very, very crucial. We talked about another report, right? We talked about the State of Global Climate report that has been published by the World Meteorological Organization. So these kind of topics and these kind of questions, many a times in the past, in your past prelims papers, you will see that these kind of questions have come. So just be prepared for these kind of questions as well. So India risking demographic dividend. Now the World Bank basically recently has published a report called as World Jobs for Resilience, and this has been published for South Asia including India, and it has highlighted a very significant challenge that is facing this particular region, and this is basically the underutilization of the demographic dividend. Underutilization of demographic dividend adequately. So in South Asia, including India. And this basically comes from this particular report, that is jobs for resilience. Jobs for resilience report. Now, in this particular scenario, what it has said is that despite very strong projected growth rates for 2024-25 of almost 6 to 6.1%, India is expected and India is said to have a robust growth of 7.5% in financial year 2023-24 as well. Now, the pace of job creation actually lags behind the increase in the working age population in India. This is one of the challenges that it has highlighted, that the pace of job creation is not keeping up with the growth in the working age population, and this is leading to declining employment ratios. So this mismatch basically has resulted in a decline in the employment ratios, and more so in India than any other country in this particular region except for Nepal. Until 2022, this is what they have said, that although we have seen slight improvement in 2023, but some of the underlying issues that we see, it still remains. And that's why the World Bank has pointed out that South Asia could match the employment rates of the other emerging markets and developing economies. The region actually could see a better or higher 15% or 16% output growth altogether. So overall, that's why it talks about the fact that this region could achieve 16% higher growth if the employment rates match those of other EMDEs, meaning emerging markets and developing economies. So overall, what basically it says is that the current failure to leverage the demographic dividend is described as a missed opportunity by this particular report. And the report that's why also has also identified the weak employment trends that we have seen specifically in the non-agricultural sectors. And that's why it has in a manner reflected upon an institutional and economic challenges that Indian business growths have also seen. So that's why to combat these kind of issues, it also suggests that we have to foster job creation. It also recommends certain strategies, for example, supporting of the women participation in economy, and also increasing the trade openness altogether and enhancing the educational opportunities. So these three measures specifically have been mentioned. One, the women participation. Women participation being one major factor, then education being another important factor, and trade openness. Trade openness being another important factor. So that's why these three important things have been measured, and they are the measures that are aiming to address the employment gap and also help the region to capitalize on the demographic potential for a more resilient and inclusive growth altogether in the country. And this is something that we have been highlighting very frequently, that where we talk about, for example, if you go back to 8th of March discussion that we have done. So on 8th of March, on the occasion of Women's Day, there were a couple of articles, editorial articles that were published in the Hindu. So you can go back to the 8th of March where it has talked about the job gap between men and women, and why it is very, very important for women participation in the job market as well. So you can go and revisit those articles, because that will help you in understanding what we mean here, because that is where the opportunities, the missed opportunities, have to be filled up. Because unfortunately right now we see that we have been talking about, and you'll see that there will be a lot of mentions of India's young population, that overall India's population is younger than many of the countries, and this is where India needs to leverage all this as well. But unfortunately that's not happening in the job scenario. It's not happening in the employment opportunities, because employment opportunities are not growing at the same rate as the population levels are growing. Populations are growing faster, the young population levels are growing faster, but the employment opportunities for the same population is not growing that fast. So this is where the report says that we need to take measures to ensure that we do not miss this opportunity, because in the next 25-30 years all this young population will start moving towards an older population, and then we'll start moving towards countries where we have seen some kind of stagnancy in their economies, because the populations have become older, the average age has become older. So that's why before that happens in India, we need to ensure that we are at a position where we are able to leverage that for the betterment and growth of the Indian economy. So that is basically what these kind of reports have highlighted. Then the next article, how has Kahneman's work in psychology withstood the test of time? Now in this particular article, this basically talks about Daniel Kahneman, and he has been a monumental figure both in psychology as well as in economics, and he passed away on March 27th, and that's why on that perspective this particular article has been mentioned. Now it's not, I would not say that this entire article is important. I don't know whether you have read this book or not, Thinking Fast and Slow. Very wonderful book to read, and he is known for this particular book. It is one of the best sellers. It has been one of the best sellers in the international market. Now overall, basically when it comes to his role, he also got a Nobel Prize, and what we see is that when it comes to him, he actually had contributed a lot when it comes to psychology and economics, and you can say a relation between the two. So overall, that's why we see that he also talked about the judgment and decision making, and how exactly the role of behavioral economics, how exactly behavioral economics works, and showcasing the interplay between the psychological insights and all the economic behavior without any initial intention of impacting the economics directly. So overall, what we see is that in 2002 he also got a Nobel Prize, and the Nobel Prize that he got, it was basically in recognition of the integration of psychological research into economics. So that's why it becomes very crucial. So that, just remember that this is basically what exactly it was, that it was for recognizing the integration of psychology, or you can say psychology based research into economics. So that's why this is something that he did, and later his work also delved into understanding of happiness and well-being, and developing innovative methods to measure the happiness, and examining the relationship between income, life satisfaction and happiness. So we see that all these work have been done by him, and most importantly there was a thought or thinking process that he spoke of, and that was a system based approach that he used to mention. So this part of the article basically mentions the same, that how exactly he had talked about two systems of thinking, right? Two systems of thinking. So one, let's say system 1 and system 2. Now in this particular scenario, when he talked about system 1 thinking and system 2 thinking, this was mainly, you can say, a difference between what you can call as a kind of intuitive thinking, all right, and intuitive thinking where you are believing your intuitions and you are taking a decision based on the intuitions, and on the second hand, the other one was more deliberative and cautious. So one, you can say, is something which is intuitive in nature. One system is intuitive in nature, and the second one is more deliberative in nature. And you will see that in many of the approaches that many of the leaders take, right? On the cricket field also, there is one person who's known for his intuitive thinking, a captain uh, who has been a former captain of India and a former captain of a cricket franchise also. He's known for his intuitive thinking. And on the other hand, many of the other captains, they are known for their deliberative thinking, cautious thinking, that they take decisions based on a lot of different factors and not potentially only on the intuitions and some of the things that they, you can say, a kind of an automatic decision making that we see in certain leaders. So that's why there are things that have been, all these things were mentioned in his studies, and that's why we see that there were all these things that were brought into highlights by him. And this is a very good book to read if anyone is interested. Now, coming to some of the revisited headlines, and we have been talking about ED and the role of ED. Now, this article on your page number 1 is ED can summon anyone for any information, is what Supreme Court has said. Now, Supreme Court has supported the enforcement directorates or EDs, the broad authority that it has, emphasizing that the agency can summon anybody for any information. And this is a decision that came when the Supreme Court criticized 4 district collectors from Tamil Nadu for not appearing in person when summoned by ED, which is something which ED was investigating an anti-money laundering activity in their case. And despite the collectors' plea for more time due to impending Lok Sabha elections and the need to gather more information from various different administrations, district administrations and branches about sand mining sites, the court found that their excuses were unsatisfactory, and that's why Justice Bela Trivedi, who was leading the bench, remarked that their lack of respect for the court's order and constitution is being shown here, is visible here. The court also refuted the argument that the collectors, who were also preoccupied with maintaining law and order and overseeing district programs, could not send the authorized agents to their state, and as per the Prevention of Money Laundering Act. And at the same time, instead, it underscored that PMLA also grants ED the power to summon any individual necessary for the investigation or proceedings. So consequently, the court also mandated that the personal appearance for the collectors have to happen by the 25th of April, and then they have also scheduled a follow-up by the 6th of May. Now, overall, when it comes to this, there is something that we discussed yesterday also, that is about the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, and this is where the role of ED comes into the picture. What is ED supposed to do? It would investigate money laundering cases, and that's why it will look into, it has been empowered to detect and investigate the cases of money laundering, and this includes identifying the proceeds of crime and also the persons who are involved in the money laundering cases. Alright, now in this particular scenario, the ED also has authority to provisionally also even attach the properties that belong to the proceeds of crime under the PMLA, as we had discussed yesterday as well. And this prevents the transfer or conversion, disposition or even movement of such properties. Now, overall, for such cases, if there is sufficient evidence that has been gathered by the ED is responsible for prosecuting the individuals who are involved in money laundering cases before a special court that has been designated under the PMLA. And that's why we see that apart from prosecuting for the money laundering offences, ED also has authority to impose financial penalties on individuals and entities for any kind of non-compliance under the provisions of PMLA. And that's why even, let's say, failure to maintain records, provide information, all these things will also be considered as a part of it. And that's why we see that while primarily they would be focusing on money laundering cases, their roles are also extended to even financing of terrorism as well as a part of the PMLA. So that's why, because we know that a lot of money laundering cases also have been involved with the activities of terror finance. So that's why we see that ED would have all these aspects and has all these control, and that's why the Supreme Court said that ED, whatever has been asked by ED, they have to go forward and they have to act according to what has been asked by ED. Then another article based on whatever we have been discussing in the previous articles as well, the Supreme Court why has criticized center and asked why did center turn a blind eye to Patanjali's COVID cure claim, asks Supreme Court. The Supreme Court basically has criticized the Indian government for not addressing the claims made by Patanjali Ayurved, which had promoted its product as a complete cure for COVID-19. The court basically has been considering perjury proceedings against Baba Ramdev, who is Patanjali's co-founder, in addition to all the existing contempt charges that already have been put on the Patanjali Ayurved company. Now, what we see is that it has been demanded to the government that they have to present a comprehensive affidavit to clarify whether it has been complicit with Patanjali's action or not. And during the Patanjali's peak that we saw in pandemic's peak that we saw back in 2020 and 21, we saw that Patanjali Ayurved was heavily advertising its product as the sole solution for COVID-19, and that is something that has been highlighted by the court as well, that it is something which is potentially misleading, especially since the government did not intervene or correct the narrative that these products were supplementary rather than the primary treatments. And that's why the court also has expressed dissatisfaction with Patanjali and also its managing director Balakrishna. The apologies that they have given for their misleading advertisements, considering them insincere altogether. And that's why they have previously also we saw that they were warned not to make unfounded claims on their products, where certain words, they were asked that certain words like complete cure should not be used in the context of where they cannot actually provide a complete cure. And we see that they also emphasize that the laws must be followed as long as they are effective. And that's why, especially when it comes to the 1954 Act, the Drugs and Magic Remedies Objectionable Advertisement Act of 1954, this is something that has to be adhered to. So that's why all these things have been mentioned by the court, and they have again scheduled another hearing for April 10th. So this is again something that will go on for another proceeding, and we have to see how the things unfold in the coming days. And we saw that in the previous days also. I think it was 27th of February when the previous hearing happened, and since then this has been a developing story. Now, coming to the last article, something that we have seen for the past couple of days, Iran vows to punish Israel for attack on embassy complex. Now, what Iran is saying is that it has, what we have seen is that Iran has issued a stern warning to Israel, and it has vowed that there will be a retaliation for an airstrike that happened in Damascus, and that resulted in the deaths of 7 members of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and that something that Iran has said that this attack also led to, you can say, a destruction of Iran's consular annex building as well. Now, Israel as of now has not commented on this strike at all, and this is something that has increased the tensions in West Asia amidst all the ongoing conflicts in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen. And at the same time, the Iranian media, the Iranian state media, they reported that Israeli F-35 fighter jets, they had launched 6 missiles overall that destroyed the 5-story building near this embassy, that killed a total of 13 people. Now, in this particular scenario, we see that Iran's supreme leader Khamenei and at the same time President Ibrahim Raisi also have condemned the attack, and they have promised that there will be repercussions for Israel. And that's why the incident has drawn international attention as well. The UN Security Council meeting also has been requested by Russia to discuss the strike and all the implications that it has for region's stability as well. So that's why we have to see how the things unfold, because Iran's UN mission has called for Security Council to condemn the attack and warning of potential further conflict as well. So that's why this has opened up a new gate of conflict that until now was, you can say, round the corner. Now, coming finally to the mains questions of the day. First is, examine the implications of Russia's engagement with Taliban. Discuss the potential challenges and opportunities this presents for India's foreign policy towards Afghanistan and Central Asia. So first things about Russia and how Russia is going to play a role in all that, what Russia is doing, and maybe what further Russia would do in the coming days, and at the same time what it means for India's foreign policy, India's relation with Afghanistan. We also see that we have an engagement with Afghanistan's Taliban right now, and we have been continuing with all the support that we had for people of Afghanistan and all the work that we were doing in Afghanistan. All these things have not ceased even since Afghanistan has been taken over by Taliban. So we see that we do have our dialogues, continued dialogues with Taliban. So what it means for India's foreign policy, how India engages with Afghanistan and Russia at the same time, and in also maintaining peace and stability for all this area. Second question, analyze the potential impact of political will, particularly in election season, on advancing climate change agenda. So as I told you that this is the time when some kind of importance has to be given to climate change. The political parties have to show a will, and at the same time people of the country also perhaps have to come forward. The voters also have to come forward, and they also are going to play a very important role in ensuring that these issues really become an issue in the elections as well, and the political parties also come to understand the highlights of these problems, and they should have a clear-cut agenda, clear-cut plan in mind if they want to come forward and ask for votes in the coming elections. So that's why you have to mention all these things and how exactly an approach has to be taken by the political parties as well. So this is it for today's session. Thank you very much for being here. Good day.